Hello. Today I would like to talk about the Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life. Or is it? So, It's a Wonderful Life was made in 1946 and remains one of the most, in my opinion, realistic portrayals of modern life in the United States, even though it's almost 100 years old. It stars Jimmy Stewart as George Bailey in his first role back from World War II. The director, producer, and part writer, there were quite a few writers, is Frank Capra, who said he made the film to exalt the individual's belief in himself and to combat the modern trend towards atheism. We'll circle back around to that. The film begins with a sign which reads, "You are now in Bedford Falls," which right away transports us to this town and the story. We meet the selfless do-gooder, Jimmy Stewart's character, George Bailey. George is a man with a singular dream: to travel, to see the world, to explore places he's never seen before. Which sounds familiar. Oh well. His original plan is to go to college. He wants to study, graduate, and become an architect. He wants to build things, which would, in essence, help him travel. Through a series of unfortunate events, he loses reach of his desires over and over and remains in Bedford Falls, trapped by his increasing responsibilities for the good of everybody else. Every time sacrificing his own dream for the betterment of the town and the townsfolk. Interestingly, for every good deed George does, he's subsequently punished, which is kind of goes to that expression, no good deed goes unpunished. It's George Bailey. That is about George Bailey. George saves his brother Harry's life when they're children, and in doing so, he loses the hearing in his left ear, which would later prevent him from being able to join the military during World War II, which is another way he could have potentially been able to travel. So I guess that's good and bad. He stops his childhood employer, Mr. Gower, from accidentally poisoning a customer and gets slapped around for his troubles. When Harry graduates from high school, George was supposed to go off to college, but their father, Peter, has a stroke and passes away. So George stays at the Bailey's Brother Building and Loan, his father's business, with his own brother, Billy, because the board votes to keep the business open on the contingency that George remains there to run it. The alternative would be, would allow Mr. Potter to get way too much power. So George kind of has to agree because that's a massive guilt trip. So George gives his college money to his brother Harry so Harry could go off to get his degree on the agreement that when Harry graduates from college, he will return to run the building and loan so that George can then go off to school. However, when Harry returns, he comes back married, and his wife's father rather, has a job offer for Harry with fantastic growth outlook. And it's at that moment at the train station that George realizes that his chances to go off to school are done. It's this really beautiful shot of Jimmy Stewart standing by the train with, you could see the emotions going across his face and the realization, and it's really poignant and very heartbreaking, actually, to watch your dreams basically leave you behind. Ouch. George winds up getting married to Mary. They are about to go on their honeymoon. He is finally going to leave Bedford Falls, but they're leaving in the early 1930s, and there is a run on the bank as well as the building and loan. George winds up getting all of his honeymoon money away to the customers of the building and loan, just what you need to get you through. To keep it open, instead of having to go to Mr. Potter, who at this point has used his wealth to take control of pretty much the whole town, but definitely the bank at this point. Which brings us basically to the end of the movie where Uncle Billy accidentally gives Mr. Potter $8,000, which in today's value is around, if the inflation calculator is to be believed, $137,000. A lot. Which is the building and loans money. George is literally on a bridge ready to sacrifice himself to save his family, Uncle Billy, the building and loan, and all the people who depend on him. George's suicide attempt is thwarted by an angel, Clarence. Clarence shows George what it would be like if he was never born, which I think is what most people remember from the movie and what's most often parodied. And he sends George to this nightmarish dystopian Pottersville, where essentially Mr. Potter does own the town. Which kind of doesn't make sense. Like, Clarence shows George what it would be like if he was never born, not if he died on the bridge that day. So when George returns, he realizes his value to Bedford Falls and his family and friends and all that. But the issue of the missing money has in no way, shape, or form been resolved, which is kind of the point of George's troubles. So I've never really understood like why Clarence showed him what it would be like if he was never born. It's kind of dumb. I'm going to stand by that. It's kind of dumb, but whatever. Let's discuss Mr. Potter, the wealthy upper-class villain of the movie. He stole $8,000 and got away with it. Period. That's it. And it's really strange that that was allowed to happen, given this film was made at the height of the production code, also known as the Hays Code, which had a rule that criminals must be caught or punished by the end of the film. Criminals were not allowed to get away with their devious acts, which kind of shows that the movie leaves off on such happy imagery with George and his family, and that every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings, that you kind of forget that Mr. Potter won. It's very Leonard Cohen, you know, the rich get richer and the poor stay poor. It's very symbolic of the worst parts of capitalism and very realistic nearly a century later. Woof. At the beginning of the film, we see that Mr. Potter and George's father, Peter Bailey, are discussing a matter of a $5,000 loan. And Mr. Bailey is seeking an extension for the loan, whereas Mr. Potter wants to foreclose on people's houses to get the money back. So this kind of shows that Mr. Potter does have a financial stake at the Bailey Brothers building and loan. And we also know that he's on the board for the building and loan, which brings up a lot of questions for me. Is the building and loan public? Like they sell stock on the market? Or it's a building and loan. It is a financial institution, though it's not a bank. And I'll be honest, I don't know the regulations as it pertains to a building and loan, as it compared to a bank. And especially don't know what the regulations were in the 1920s through 40s. So I don't know, maybe they just automatically need to have a board for like ethical considerations. I don't know. But I do know it's very strange that Mr. Potter is on the board given his involvement with the bank, which would be a competing business. That's very strange and kind of a conflict of interest. It just doesn't really make sense to me, but all right. Either way, Mr. Potter did make a financial investment in the building and loan, and it seems like, to me, he is kind of rightfully angry that the building and loan is being run by people to his point of view are not making good financial decisions. The building and loan is kind of over leveraging its assets, and it is giving money to people who seemingly aren't necessarily able to pay it back, particularly in this time period. I also want to say, minimum wage didn't become a thing until 1938, which is before the movie came out in 1946. However, from when this scene takes place, it would have been a few years before that. So I don't know if that was a consideration. The building and loan is making risky loans, which if you have a financial investment in this business, you probably would be unhappy with. But while George and his father Peter were making maybe not on paper the right decisions, they were making them for the right reasons. And you can kind of see the values these men have, where at the end of the day, they kind of want the same thing, but they want it for different reasons. So Mr. Potter asserts that giving out all these bad loans will create a discontented, lazy rabble instead of a thrifty working class, and all because of a few starry-eyed dreamers like Peter Bailey stir them up and fill their heads with a lot of impossible ideas. insert American dream propaganda, which is problematic, but not necessarily what this film is talking about. And then George, to the effect, argues later, allowing people to live and own livable homes rather than renting a place in Mr. Potter's overpriced slums makes them better citizens, better customers. So we see Mr. Potter kind of values hard work and considers that character building. It's a very puritanical view of work. He's pro-individualism, which Frank Capra wanted. He's kind of small government oversight, pro-big business. It's very free market kind of capitalism, which is not good. I'll come back around. Mr. Bailey, conversely, wants to invest in people and infrastructure and houses to, it's like better citizens who have stakes in their community make better people. Whoa. And, people work better. They're better workers when they're healthy. And fun fact, poverty actually isn't good for economic growth. It stalls the economy. So does hoarding wealth. It's almost like trickle-down theory doesn't work. Reagan. So you need people to have money so they can spend money. Because you can't spend what you don't got. So Mr. Bailey is essentially just pro-livable wage, which isn't an aspect of the free or command market or capitalism or socialism. That's just good economics all around and humanitarian. So yeah, they basically want the same things. They're just going about it in different ways. And I would argue Mr. Bailey's is a far better way to go about it. Unfortunately, the U.S. tends to side with Mr. Potter's beliefs for the most part as it pertains to actual practices, education, policies, infrastructure, and so on. Insert some blah, blah, blah about Burton strain and animal theory. It's almost like they're creating criminals by doing this. It's a whole thing. Whatever. People suck. Moving on. Reagan! Mr. Potter really shows the worst aspects of capitalism, while George Bailey shows the positives of interventionist thinking. So in terms of the types of markets that exist, I guess a lot of people aren't aware that every industrialized nation has the same type of market, which is a mixed market, meaning no country has a pure free market, or there's no such thing as pure capitalism. No country operates on pure capitalism because it doesn't work. It'll never work. Stop trying to make it work. It doesn't. Similarly, no country has a pure command or demand market, meaning socialism in its pure form doesn't work. It will never work. Stop trying to make it work. Every country, as I said, has a mixed market. They are mixing aspects of capitalism and socialism to hopefully come out as best they can. And how they mix it is where the differences lie. You have, for instance, Norway, China, Japan, Australia, Canada, United States all have mixed markets. It's just, again, how they have blended capitalism and socialism are different. So the United States has what I call a interventionist model, which would assert that we really want capitalism, which I don't, it sucks. But we recognize, again, in its pure form, it doesn't work. So we have to intervene with socialist services and rules and laws and regulations to ensure people's health and safety are being met. Which is, again, circling back around, important, because if you have a sick and impoverished workers, they're not working to the best of their ability, and they're not going to be able to buy goods, which again stalls the economy. Right? So that's not good. So intervening is a good thing. Moving on. It's kind of funny that the FBI actually issued a memo regarding the film as an infiltration of communism and deliberately maligns the upper class to show people who have money as a mean and despicable. And J. Edgar Hoover actually put this on a watch list for an attack on capitalism. This is during the days where we had the House of Un-American Activities Committee, and this is a little bit before McCarthyism, for instance. So the people who made the film weren't blacklisted, but they were really looking at the original writers for the script because Frank Capra was actually like a hardcore conservative Republican, and apparently who adored Mussolini, maybe, which seems like a massive red flag to me. But he was a personal friend of J. Edgar Hoover, and yeah, they were actually like very suspicious of the people who wrote the original screenplay. Like I said, there were a lot of writers on the script. I don't know if later the writers for this film were put on like a watch list because of like the whole McCarthyism era and like blacklisting people, particularly unfortunately Jewish people, as being communists or whatever. Really dark times in the United States. Yee. So anyway, the lesson of the movie. Seeing things solely through a monetary or economic lens may make you wealthy, but you'll likely be alone and unhappy, versus looking wholly through a social lens may get you into trouble financially, but at the end of the day, you'll have people who care about you, and a village can raise $8,000 provided one of the people in that village is very wealthy. Hee-haw. Either way, they'll come to your aid because you've come to theirs. You're not alone. You have a community, family, and friends. As the note would say to George at the end of the film, remember, George, no man is a failure who has friends. Neither of these men were happy, George and Mr. Potter. They were respectively too selfish and too selfless. George had to sacrifice everything to get just a little, and he never got his dream, though the friendships and bonds he made were everything to him. Conversely, Mr. Potter sacrificed friendship and family for love and money, but as it pertains to materialism, as Peter Bailey said, all you can take with you is that which you give away. He can hoard all that wealth, but when he dies, it's not going to matter because you can't take it with you. So it comes down to moderation. If you have too much of one, you likely will not have the other. And further, we can see monopolies are bad. Banks can be a monopoly. The community needed the building and loan to exist in Bedford Falls as a source of competition for Mr. Potter. Without it, Mr. Potter would have been the only financial institution in Bedford Falls, which would allow him the opportunity to essentially price gouge, discriminate based on who he's making the loans for, charging larger interest rates than the building and loan did. Also charging what he wanted for housing, because he kind of controlled the housing market in the area, with George being his only realty competitor. And the housing can become increasingly subpar with the other options available, also only renting, whereas conversely George allowed people to have a mortgage so they could, actually own their home. So competition is beneficial, not for companies, but for consumers. And basically, at the end of the day, if no one's happy, capitalism is working. Yay, capitalism. People suck. This movie's really depressing. It was not a wonderful life. It was a sad life. And I don't really understand why it's considered a Christmas movie, because it's not all that Christmassy, but it is kind of religious, which is what Frank Capra wanted, I guess. So, it's a movie about a man who nearly kills himself. I don't know. This movie just makes me really sad. What are your thoughts on It's a Wonderful Life? Comment below, I guess, or something. I don't know. Merry holidays. Goodbye.